Pardon me? Yes, it is. Yeah. I'm pretty much going to read it as is. That's correct.
He wants fiction.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing this.
Well,
Short notice, and we're up most tonight, but somehow I think we can get a good dialogue.
well, young as you are, if it had been me, I'd have been dead. You should stand there. You look all right.
Thank you.
Will the committee come to order? The committee is continuing this morning its hearings on proposals relating to the ending of the war in Southeast Asia. This morning, the committee will hear testimony from Mr. John Kerry, and if he has an associate, we'd be glad to hear from them. These are men who have fought in this unfortunate war in Vietnam, and I believe they deserve to be heard and listened to by the Congress and by the officials in the executive branch and by the public generally. You have a perspective that those in the government who make our nation's policy do not always have, and I'm sure that your testimony today will be helpful to the committee in its consideration of the proposals before it. I'd like to add simply on my own account that I regret very much the action of the Supreme Court in denying the veterans the right to use the mall. I regret that. It seems to me to be but another instance of an insensitivity of our government to the tragic effects of this war upon our people. I want also to congratulate Mr. Kerry, you and your associates, upon the restraint that you've shown, certainly in the hearing the other day when there were a great many of your people here, and I think you conducted yourselves in the most commendable manner throughout this week, which I'm sure whenever people gather, there's always a tendency for some of the more emotional ones to do things which are even against their own interest. But I think you had deserved much of the credit. As I understand, you were one of the leaders of this group, and I have joined with some of my colleagues, specifically Senator Hart, in an effort to try to change the attitude of our government toward your efforts at expressing and bringing to this committee and to the country your views about the war. And I personally don't know of any group who would have both a greater justification for doing it and also a better, more accurate view of the effect of the war, which is, as you know, there has grown up in this town a feeling that it's extremely difficult to get accurate information about the war, and I don't know a better source than you and your associates. So we're very pleased to have you and your associates, Mr. Kerry. And at the beginning, if you would give to the reporter your full name and a little of your briefly, your biographical attitude so that the record will show that clearly.
I would like to say for the record that, and also for the men behind me who are also wearing the uniform and their medals, that my sitting up here is really symbolic. I'm not here as John Kerry. I'm here as one member of a group of 1,000, which is a small representation of a very much larger group of veterans in this country. And were it possible for all of them to sit at this table, they would be here and have the same kind of testimony. I would simply like to speak in very general terms. I apologize if my statement is general, because I received notification yesterday you would hear me, and I'm afraid because of the injunction I was up most of the night and haven't had a great deal of chance to prepare. I would like to talk representing all those veterans and say that several months ago in Detroit, we had an investigation at which over 150 honorably discharged and many very highly decorated veterans testified to war crimes committed in Southeast Asia. Not isolated incidents, but crimes committed on a day-to-day basis with a full awareness of officers at all levels of command. It's impossible to describe to you exactly what did happen in Detroit, the emotions in the room, the feelings of the men who were reliving their experiences in Vietnam. But they did. They relived the absolute horror of what this country, in a sense, made them do. They told the stories of times that they had personally raped, cut off ears, cut off heads, taped wires from portable telephones to human genitals and turned up the power, cut off limbs, blown up bodies, randomly shot at civilians, razed villages in a fashion reminiscent of Genghis Khan, shot cattle and dogs for fun, poisoned food stocks, and generally ravaged the countryside of South Vietnam, in addition to the normal ravage of war and the normal and very particular ravaging which is done by the applied bombing power of this country. We called this investigation the Winter Soldier Investigation. The term Winter Soldier is a play on words of Thomas Paine's in 1776 when he spoke of the sunshine patriot and summertime soldiers who deserted at Valley Forge because the going was rough. And we who've come here to Washington have come here because we feel we have to be winter soldiers now. We could come back to this country and we could be quiet. We could hold our silence. We could not tell what went on in Vietnam. But we feel because of what threatens this country, the fact that the crimes threaten it, not Reds and not redcoats, but the crimes which we're committing are what threaten it. And we have to speak out. I would like to talk to you a little bit about what the result is of the feelings these men carry with them after coming back from Vietnam. The country doesn't know it yet, but it's created a monster in the form of millions of men who have been taught to deal and to trade in violence and who are given the chance to die for the biggest nothing in history. Men who have returned with a sense of anger and a sense of betrayal which no one has yet grasped. As a veteran and one who feels this anger, I'd like to talk about it. We're angry because we feel we have been used in the worst fashion by the administration of this country. In 1970, at West Point, Vice President Agnew said, "Some glamorize the criminal misfits of society while our best men die in Asian rice paddies to preserve the freedoms which those misfits abuse." And this was used as a rallying point for our effort in Vietnam. But for us, his boys in Asia, whom the country was supposed to support, his statement is a terrible distortion from which we can only draw a very deep sense of revulsion and hence the anger of some of the men who are here in Washington today. It's a distortion because we in no way considered ourselves the best men of this country, because those he calls misfits were standing up for us in a way that nobody else in this country dared to. Because so many who have died would have returned to this country to join the misfits in their efforts to ask for an immediate withdrawal from South Vietnam. Because so many of those best men have returned as quadriplegics and amputees, and they lie forgotten in Veterans Administration's hospitals in this country, which fly the flag which so many have chosen as their own personal symbol. And we cannot consider ourselves America's best men when we were ashamed of and hated what we were called on to do in Southeast Asia. In our opinion, and from our experience, there is nothing in South Vietnam, nothing which could happen that realistically threatens the United States of America. And to attempt to justify the loss of one American life in Vietnam, Cambodia, or Laos by linking such loss to the preservation of freedom, which those misfits supposedly abuse, is to us the height of criminal hypocrisy. And it's that kind of hypocrisy which we feel has torn this country apart. We are probably much more angry than that, and I don't want to go into the foreign policy aspects because I'm outclassed here. I know that all of you have talked about every possible alternative to getting out of Vietnam. We understand that. We know that you've considered the seriousness of the aspects to the utmost level, and I'm not going to try and deal on that. But I want to relate to you the feeling which many of the men who've returned to this country express. Because we are probably angriest about all that we were told about Vietnam and about the mystical war against communism. We found that not only was it a civil war, an effort by a people who had for years been seeking their liberation from any colonial influence whatsoever, but also we found that the Vietnamese, whom we had enthusiastically molded after our own image, were hard put to take up the fight against the threat we were supposedly saving them from. We found that most people didn't even know the difference between communism and democracy. They only wanted to work in rice paddies, without helicopters strafing them, and bombs with napalm burning their villages and tearing their country apart. They wanted everything to do with the war, particularly with this foreign presence of the United States of America, to leave them alone in peace. And they practiced the art of survival by siding with whichever military force was present at a particular time, be it Viet Cong, North Vietnamese, or American. We found also that all too often American men were dying in those rice paddies for want of support from their allies. We saw firsthand how monies from American taxes was used for a corrupt dictatorial regime. We saw that many people in this country had a one-sided idea of who was kept free by our flag, as blacks provided the highest percentage of casualties. We saw Vietnam ravaged equally by American bombs, as well as by search and destroy missions, as well as by Viet Cong terrorism. And yet we listened while this country tried to blame all of the havoc on the Viet Cong. We rationalized destroying villages in order to save them. We saw America lose her sense of morality as she accepted very coolly a My Lai and refused to give up the image of American soldiers that hand out chocolate bars and chewing gum. We learned the meaning of free fire zones, shoot anything that moves, and we watched while America placed a cheapness on the lives of Orientals.